Hello everybody, Neffertity here. Alright, so first I have to apologize to you guys. The following recording is from the art classes that I teach every Saturday. The first portion of this entire recording that was about 4.5 or 5 hours or so is completely garbage, and the entire first portion where you see me painting the sand and the bushes and the water, unfortunately it's all been destroyed. There is no way I can save the footage. So I do apologize for the fact that this kind of just jumps straight into it and there's already half of the work done. I can try to do a crash course on it later on in the future if people want me to do more instruction on backgrounds and detailing and things like that. If that is something you'd like to see and you're a part of my art classes or you're interested in taking part in them, simply let me know in the comments below and I will get back to you as soon as I'm able to. The classes are hosted on Picarto, so it's usually pretty mobile friendly, so even if you're not by your computer, you can still apply these lessons and use them with all kinds of paint, color pencils, markers, anything like that. But yeah, I'm kind of bummed out that I lost all that recording and there's no way to save it, but that's life. Always make sure your recordings are set up to the proper format before you begin your recording. Don't be like me. Don't have it set to an FLV file, please. But enough of my rambling. Let's go ahead and jump right into the recording from the class today. Alrighty, so the very first thing that I actually did was I showed people how to make your own custom brushes in Fire Alpaca, which is super simple. I used a 900 by 900 canvas, did like a totally random shape and just added little splitches and splotches here and there, just making sure that my background was transparent and the actual shape of the brush that I wanted was solid black, so I fill it in here and make sure that it's one solid image. Then I just selected the exterior and cropped it so that it didn't have any extra on it. As soon as that was done, all you have to do is just save the file and make sure that it is saved as a transparent PNG. You do not want the white background, because if you have a white background when you try and save a brush like this, it will cause so many problems with the texturing and the way that it renders color. So just make sure that you save it into a brush folder as a transparent PNG. As soon as that's done, you just go to the bottom here where it says Add Bitmap Brush, load the brush that you wanted, and then fiddle around with your settings until you get something that you're happy with for the kind of texture that you're going for. This will definitely vary a lot depending on what kind of a brush you're making. You can see by moving the sliders around like this, it alters the spacing and the way that it rotates and things like that. Messing with the color and the hue jitter will give it like a variance in the colors that you have selected. Just hit OK when you're done, it loads it up, and it puts the brush directly into Fire Alpaca, ready to use. Then you just select the colors that you want to use for it, and you begin your painting. So here, when I did the bushes in the recording I lost, they had very soft, fuzzy edges, and I just wasn't quite happy with how they looked. They looked a little too soft for me. And I wanted this whole painting to kind of be like nice and hard-edged and just look really nice and crispy. So I came back in with my handmade brush that I did here to kind of harden up these edges and add some stark highlight edge. You can see right there how it's got that little color jitter going on where it changes from like a green to kind of a yellowish color. And then I just did the exact same thing in some of the low areas with a darker green. I'll show you guys how to blend this here in a little bit. This just adds a little bit more depth to the painting and helps it blend together nicely, I think. I kind of fiddle around with the settings a lot right here until I'm happy with how it looks. I tried initially a Gaussian blur that did not work the way I wanted it to because it hardened the edges too much. So then I just came in and started manually blurring the darker edges, and it came out a lot better once I played around with the settings some more. I'm not what I would say as a how do I say it? Like, I'm not super professional, but I believe I have enough of an understanding that I can make art that looks nice. So I still have a lot of learning to do myself, and my particular art style is kind of like an unusual blend between like a cartoony and a realistic thing. So it's like I don't have quite cartoon, but I don't have realism. I don't quite have like an anime feel to it. It's just kind of its own thing. But I'm always willing to learn and pick up new techniques from places here and there to better improve and just make my art look much nicer in general. Here, I'm just going in with the leaf brush that is already part of Fire Alpaca, which, by the way, Fire Alpaca is 100% free. I totally recommend it. It is an awesome program for being free and doing what it does. Every piece that I've done for the last 6-7 months or so, I think, has been done in Fire Alpaca. So it has pretty good quality once you get used to it. Not half bad, and it does come preloaded with a lot of really nice brushes. So you don't have to go hunting down a whole bunch of them. Here I'm playing with the hue a little bit. I felt like the bushes were just a little bit too saturated, so I just turned them down a little bit using a small filter. I can do a separate class on like playing with lighting and filters and things like that if that's something people would be interested in. I also repositioned my bushes a little bit because I wasn't quite happy with how far off into the water they hung. It just looked kind of weird, and I wasn't happy with it, so I just blended out the edges of the water here and made it wrap around a little bit more smoothly. I also went in and fixed some of the seafoam right here near the edges and then blended out the sand because the sand looked a little bit too bright there. Right here I actually make a small oopsie, but I catch myself, thankfully. I started painting on the water layer. So when I was initially doing all my detailing, I painted on the water layer and was like, oh crap, look at that. But you can see I fixed it right there and I managed to blend it back out a little bit. I also brought my sand particles a little bit more along the edge line of the water where it makes the darker sand, just to help it blend a little bit better, and ultimately this ended up looking a lot better than what it did before with this really hard edge. A lot of digital painting is literally just experimentation until you find something that makes you happy and it works for what you're trying to do. Don't be afraid to experiment out of the box. If an idea jumps into your head for something that you want to try to do, by all means do it, you know? Also remember to save frequently. There is nothing worse than doing a whole bunch of work on a canvas, having it crash, and then completely losing it. Alright, so now I'm actually going to start doing the trees. I have a kind of like a pale, almost a khaki colored brush selected here, and I'm just painting shapes for my trees that I think fit them well enough. I go in and I add some little ones here and there to kind of thicken them out a little bit. And right here I actually went back and showed one of the students in my class how to do the brushes again, because they unfortunately missed the first part due to an internet connection or something. So it's just a repeat of how to do your own custom brushes in Fire Alpaca. I debated on cutting this part out of the video, but I thought for anybody who maybe missed it, I did it a lot slower on this one. So it kind of shows more specifically how I did it when I went to import it. So that way if anybody missed it, they can kind of go back and get it again. See how to move around the sliders and everything to get the kind of thing that you're looking for. Brushes are nice and easy to make when it comes to Fire Alpaca, which is something that I enjoy. I also explained here how messing with the width and the spacing of the brush can turn it from a stamp into just a flat line. definitely something to play around with when you make a brush, is just to see how it looks and if it works for what you're doing. Look at me explaining. I'm a teaching things about color jitter and color randomization. Oh joy. Color jitter's fun to play with for sure. You get some neat mixing out of it. But now I jump back into doing my trees, which I believe at this point I went back and I started doing all of these smaller ones in the background that kind of sit in that cluster that you can see in the reference image. Now when I use reference images like that, as you can see, it's not like a carbon copy of the image that I'm referencing. It's just kind of like it's based off of it. I definitely do have to work a little bit more on the overall composition and the way that my perspective is done. I struggle with perspective a lot, so over time I will learn how to do it better, but for the time being, I'm happy with what I'm able to do. I just have to slowly learn how to do more. Make sure that you're locking the transparency when you're trying to detail things like this so that you don't scribble outside the edges and it sticks specifically to the shapes that you've done. As you can see in these trees here, they're not quite like other palm trees where they have those very sharp edges on the bark. They're very smooth and kind of rounded looking, almost like they've got zebra stripes or like small rings on them. So I just play around a little bit with my watercolor brush here, and I just start painting these rings. And as you can see, this part was insanely time consuming. I did every single one of these trees by hand, and they just took so long to paint all these little textures in here, but the end result is just absolutely fantastic. Oh, sorry, I have a small pain in my chest right there. I'm debating on jumping forward on this. I think I might, just because the whole process of doing these trees was just about the same for all of it. The only difference is that as I started painting these little zigzags and stripes and stuff, I'm following the curvature of the tree the whole way. And there goes my warm hand making my canvas freak out because my tablet got way too warm where my hand was. That happens far too often to me. I think I am going to jump this part, so basically I just went through all these individual trees and did these little stripes. I then go back and I add another layer of them using a slightly darker color. So I will jump back into this right after I have loaded the video to that point, so that you guys don't have to sit here for the next 20 minutes and watch me paint zigzags on trees. Alrighty, so now that I've done all of these little dark stripes on the trees to add another layer, I make a new layer above them, and I'm going to set it to multiply and then choose a slightly lighter color here just to brush along the outside edges. This just creates nice depth and makes these trees look more round and three-dimensional. It is important here to keep in mind where your sunlight is coming from. So the sunlight in this picture is actually coming from the upper right side of the image. So the shadows will always be cast on the lower left of these trees. And you can see as I just work my way down each one here, adding that nice shadowing detail. There are a couple spots where I actually delete some of these smaller trees in the background because I feel like they don't quite fit, or there's just too many of them clustered together here. So I take a couple out, which I think I've already done actually. And then just continuing along here with the shadowing on the trees. This one that stretches out is the only one that's kind of weird because of the angle that I have it at for the sunlight. It starts off with the shading on the left, then it goes underneath it, and then finally it migrates back to the lower side right there. since the sun is coming from that spot, it is hitting it on some parts and casting shadows on the other. It is definitely something that you have to kind of play around with a little bit until you get more accustomed to painting shadows on there. I tend to do these beach scenes a lot more because I enjoy being able to paint water, especially like bright tropical water and small things like that. But I do have plans in the future to do tutorials on just all kinds of different backgrounds and paintings, everything from forest to desert to rocky alcoves, and I have a couple planned for caves. I have some for like volcanic regions, tundras, big old glaciers, all kinds of things that pop into my head. If you have any suggestions for a background that you'd maybe like to see speed painted or something, feel free to leave a comment suggesting it. If it's something that really just pops out to me, I may end up doing a recording of the whole painting itself. Once the background's done, I don't entirely know. That's the same as this one here. For the art class, I was just mainly instructing how to do the detailing on just the background, but I may end up turning the image into like your character here. So if that's something that you guys want to see, just let me know. The little bit that I did right there was just adding a very, very subtle highlight to the right side of the trees. It just makes them pop and look a little more three-dimensional. Nothing super complex. And then now I am blending my trees into my bushes, which I'm doing using the soft eraser, and it is set to almost non-existent settings here. It's very, very, very subtle. And I'm just lightly brushing in a random circle pattern along the bases of the trees, trying to blend them in a little bit and make it look more natural. You can see that as I do this, it definitely makes the trees look more like they are popping out of these bushes rather than just being big old sticks that I stuck on them. And then I'll zoom in right here and I'll show you guys more close up what it looks like when I'm trying to do it. It's either this one or the next one that I think I do it on the next one actually. Yep, I believe it is this one that I change it on. Or I at least zoom in, I think. Yep, okay, there we go. So you can see the pattern that I do there to blend it in. You're just kind of painting in like a leafy pattern to erase part of the bottom of the tree. And it just makes it look like they're sticking out of the bushes. And they blend much, much nicer. And they look the way they're supposed to, I guess. There is a reverse way of doing this where you paint on top of them. But I find that that way doesn't quite work as well for me, because it does tend to make it very difficult to blend the shading and the shadowing and the highlights of the image that I'm sticking the trees out of or whatever, so things like bushes and grass. It makes it a lot harder to blend them because you now have an additional layer that you need to match to the background layer. And it's very tedious at times. So I find the erasing method tends to work better, for me at least. If you have your own method, then, you know, if it works, cool. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, am I right? All right, I think I'm now at the point where the trees have been blended and shaded the way that they are supposed to. So now I should be coming in to do the palm fronds, which is a very time-consuming process, but once I start kind of showing how it's done here, I will very likely jump and cut to where I've finished them all, because it's like once you see it done once, it's pretty much the exact same thing over and 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 over again. It just constantly repeats. So you can see these palm fronds here have the one main piece in the middle, and then they have a bunch of little leaves that kind of come off of that one main one. Start with just a really rough shape of that primary frond. I always start with the trees that are in the very background before I move to the ones in the foreground, just because that way it doesn't bury the details and create really unusual layering. You also don't have to worry about the fact that that tree is in the background, yet it's going to have one of its fronds kind of leap over onto the other tree. It's not a big deal because I'm going to go in and edit those later. I'm just laying down the basic foundation for my trees right now. Like that one right there, you can see it really jumped over the edge. But that's all stuff that can be edited later on. All I have to do is just blend it out. Frond after frond after frond, making very sure that they are following the flow of gravity and they're always pointing down. I've now got my watercolor brush here and I'm just painting some darker shades. This kind of adds a little variation between the greens and it makes it look a lot more natural and organic, I think. Just somewhat repeating the same motion as before, except it's just a little bit of everywhere. Just to break up that solid green line and not make it look as flat. And now I come in with the same color as before, and I begin the tireless process of painting each individual frond by hand. I've seen a lot of people, and I know I was guilty of it in the past, they would do one tree and then just duplicate it, copy paste, repeatedly for every other single tree that they did. And me personally, I don't like it when it looks like that because it looks too much like a cookie cutter. Like you literally just duplicated the same thing and then plastered it all over, which is something that you do not see in nature. Nature is not a carbon copy. No two leaves are exactly the same. No two stones are the same. No two flowers are perfectly identical. There's always differences between each one. And that's why I prefer to paint these by hand, because I find it just gives it a lot more of a natural, organic feel. But it is insanely time consuming. So you have to have the patience of a saint to be able to do this. If you're rushing to get a piece done, this part is probably not the best decision for you. This is something that will take time, and it looks better when you take time to add the details, even though not everybody may see them in the end. I'm a very analytical person. Whenever I look at anything, whether it be animation or paintings, illustrations, drawings, any form of art, I always look at every teeny tiny little detail just because it's who I am. I'll watch an animation that somebody does and I'll slow it down to 1 frame per second just so I can see how each individual slide was hand drawn, how they flow together, the type of brush stroke that was used, the different kinds of shadowing and light, the color mixing, the way that texture is done. It's just always how I've been. I'm a horrible person to watch any kind of animated movie with because I'll always stop and point out something like, oh yeah, did you see how that was animated? Well, that was a full 15 frames per second right there. It was a lot smoother than everything else. Oh, look at the way that line jumped. Oh, you see that? Oh, look at that. It's often why I'm one of the first people to find animation errors in certain things, because I'll see it happen and be like, wait a second, that's not right. Go back, watch it again, and it's the same thing, and you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely an animation error. I enjoy watching My Little Pony just specifically to try and pick out those wonderful little animation errors where things happen that are just like, wait, what? I think the best one I ever saw had to be Rainbow Dash's body completely desegments from her lower half. Her upper half and lower half just split entirely where you could tell the vector model got broken. And it's things like that that make me laugh because when I see them, they're just like, how did this pass? Like, I know there's a lot of frames that go into animation, but something that major, I mean, you'd think that the animators would have caught it, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just super analytical of everything that I watch. I'm part of an unusual breed, perhaps, but I would really love to become an animator, and I think that's part of why I super analyze everything and I really look at each individual slide and see how it's made because I want to study it and I want to learn how to do my own animations. I'm still very, very, very new to animation. I've only done a couple of them that aren't all that impressive yet. I think the prettiest one I've done probably has to be the floppy ears animation because I'm trying to do the floppy ear meme because I think it's just adorable and I love it and I want to try it. So I did a little test one of my friend Neon and it didn't come out half bad, but I feel I definitely need to work more on the initial flow of the image and making it look much softer when it moves. That is a definite need. Also, in the future, I do plan to take and crop out where you can see the chat bar on the side there for my Picarto. I've currently got my setup to where it's just capturing the entire screen, but I think if I shrink it to where you can only see Fire Alpaca, it may work a little bit better. I just hope it's not going to mess up the aspect ratio at all, having it be smaller like that, because I always watch my chat as I'm doing my art classes because not everybody can tune in with their mic. And now that I'm on the last frond here, finally, I can begin explaining the next portion of doing these trees. Which is to come in with a slightly darker color and line that little rib that sits in the middle. You can see how that kind of makes it stand out and adds that three-dimensional thing that I kind of buried when I was doing the fronds. Just little by little, building up the detailing. Once those are all done, then I come in with another little detail here that I'm going to do. But first I have to do this tree that I forgot because I'm a dingus and I somehow scrolled right past it when I was initially doing all the little frond detailing. That's me, you know? Special kind of errors left and right. It's what I do. Okay, there. Now that that is done, I can move into the next portion, which is to take like a nice sandy yellow color. And with the very light airbrush setting here, I'm just doing the very edges of the fronds. Because in all of these kind of like island palm trees that I've ever seen, they all seem to have like dead leaves on the very tips of them from being out longer and not as close to the root. I think it shows the age of the tree a lot. But just adding this little detail really helps these trees look more like island palm trees because of this one small little thing. I don't think I've ever seen a bright green one unless all the fronds are sticking straight up because it's a brand new tree that has just grown in and it's sticking out its leaves for the first time. That's about the only time I've ever seen them be that very bright, vibrant green. Other than that, they almost always have this kind of yellow fade on the edges. It's a little thing that I do, but I find it makes it look much more realistic and fun. It is very time consuming though, unfortunately. As is all things. You mustn't rush, for when you rush, your quality will suffer. Just painting and detailing and painting and detailing. All these little yellow fades. I think the hardest type of tree I ever had to draw was probably a redwood pine, because the pine needles on them have to look right. Otherwise, it ends up looking like a Douglas fir. And those trees are very, very, very different. Their needles are just ridiculous. And it's not something that I was super duper happy with. So I'm not a fan of those kind of trees, but if you have to paint them, you know, you do what you can. Now here, I'm coming in and I'm fixing all the edges here where the leaves are sort of reaching over onto the other parts of the trees where they shouldn't be because they're in the background. Before I started erasing all this, I did make a copy on my clipboard of all of the fronds, and the reason why I did that will come into play a little bit later here. It is important to go back, especially if you've been painting your trees like this and they overlap. It's very important to come around, look at it, and see where there's leaves where they shouldn't be. It helps with the three-dimensional view of the image here. There's a couple little spots where I see some that give me a bit of a hard time trying to erase them. Like this one right here. Oh, this one was a pain in the butt. Because of how I'd drawn the leaves, I had to like manually recreate some of the spots on it. But now that I've done those, I can come in and paste what's on my clipboard, and you'll see that it makes a duplicate here of all of the little fronds that I did. Any second now, it will paste. I think I'm explaining it. Yep, okay, now I see what I did. So this is a neat little trick that I picked up a long time ago, which is if you duplicate these fronds like that and just kind of layer them together to create a more mixed looking image, then come in and delete the certain spots where they don't need to be, you'll see that it creates that thick brush look that you get from the reference image where all these leaves are in the background from different trees. I had a very stubborn canvas right here. I had to turn off everything so that I could select just the trees because it was picking up some kind of color in the background. Occasionally Fire Alpaca does that. It's frustrating, but it is what it is. You make do. Now I'm just erasing all of that foliage so that it stays in the background where it belongs. I end up having to come back and do this a couple times here because there's certain spots that I miss and they just don't quite look right. So I come back and change them a little bit. And then there's other spots here where I just completely erase the fronds altogether because I don't like how low they're sitting on the canvas. I just want it to look like these are the kind of trees that are just barely sticking out of the underbrush. So just coming in and cleaning all this up. This is one of those attention to detail things that I tend to do that I don't think a lot of people really care for, but me personally, it's what I enjoy, and I find it just makes everything that I do look a little bit more natural the way I do them. And here I've added a cast shadow between all my little trees. These ones here ended up looking really bizarre after I had done the darker background ones, and I couldn't figure out why for the longest time until I realized it's because they had floating trees in the background. Since I had blotted out their trunks, you couldn't see what was supporting those fronds. I didn't catch it at first until I started painting it in darker, and it just looked really weird, and I kept trying to figure out, what did I do wrong here? Why does this look so weird? When I finally caught it, it was like, oh, I see what the problem is. It's because of the trees in the background. So then I have to do that thing where I hide the whole canvas again so that I can select just my trees. Because it was being stubborn. And then when I look at the background, it was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I see the problem here. So I went through and I ended up clearing all this out. It looked significantly better in the end after removing all this and making those trunks pop a lot more. So it is one of those things where if you take your time with things and just kind of look at it as a whole, you really do catch small little details like this that just need a slight little fix to them, and then they're good to go. And then I just cleaned up the rest, and just like that, boom. Turn the layers back on. So much better. It looks so much better here. And now I do the fronds on the other trees. These are the ones in the foreground, so it's the same method as before. I'm going to skip to when I finish them all because you guys don't need to sit here and watch me do this for the next 15-20 minutes. So I will see you guys just as soon as I have finished painting these guys. Alrighty, so I just finished doing all of these little branches. And now that they are all done and I've added my deeper colors to them, I'm going to start working on blending them into this background image that I have. So the first thing is, because they're more so in the back, I'm going to add a little more shadowing on them so that they look like they're in the darker portion of the forest where they're supposed to be. They do end up looking a little bit muddled here, and I'm not entirely happy with how they look, so I come in and I do some more scritching and scratching on them to kind of detail them out a little bit more and make them not look as like super blurry, which does work out better in the end. And once those are done, I come in and darken the trunks of the trees where there's shadows being cast, just so that they blend a little bit more. This next portion is all about just blending in the shadows, which I always do shadows on a multiply layer. So now I'm doing the shadowing for the trees that are casting their shadows on the bushes. It doesn't have to be super clean because I'm going to blur it out a little bit and make it blend much better. So you can see here, once I get it all in, I just mess around with the Gaussian blur until it gets to the point where I'm happy with it. I then grab my soft eraser, and right near the base of the trees and in some spots in the background, I just do really random quick circles around them. This helps it give that three-dimensional effect that these trees are in fact popping out of the bushes rather than just kind of disappearing there, using the Gaussian blur to blend it out if the edges are too stark or too rough like that. And now I'm going to start doing the cast shadow from the trees on the sand. So I start painting my shadowing here for where the little palm fronds are, as well as that tree that stretches out over the ocean. It casts its shadow on the sand out there as well. Blend it out with the blur tool, and then come in with a more defined layer in order to blend all that in and make it look like it's a nice shadow being cast on the beach. Because shadows are lovely. I do one more little one on the water here for this tree, since it would cast a very slight shadow, but then I turn it way down so that you can just barely see the little silhouette of it. I apologize for the harshness of my voice. I've been talking now for almost 40 minutes in this recording, and I'm a little tired. Doing the sky in the background is just done with a gradient tool. I played around with the settings a lot until I got something that I was happy with, because the color in the background from the reference image I felt was just a little bit too dark for my liking. So I lightened it a little bit, and it ended up looking significantly better. I was happy with how it came out in the end. Paint just a couple variants in the sky here for things like wispy clouds. And then I start painting my little clouds using the watercolor brush. The watercolor brush is absolutely fantastic for painting clouds because you get like these nice soft edges, but they're not too soft, so they still give you the ability to have it look like clouds. Just filling out the shapes one by one here until eventually I get a cloud shape that looks nice and fluffy. Again, this comes into where my style is kind of weird, because I don't have the super realistic style. I just have this weird mix of like cartoony and realistic, and it works for me. I'm happy with it. My clouds look inviting, like you could just jump out of an airplane and flop in one and it would be like a big cushy cotton candy fluff. But definitely paint them however you feel suits you. Style is something that everybody has their own unique development for. And here I'm coming in and cleaning up the edges of the clouds to make them look much more crisp and sharp, since everything else in the image is very crisp. I'm just a stickler for my own details sometimes. The watercolor brush is also fantastic for blending those darker shapes, as you saw right there. It is my go-to brush when I'm trying to make very subtle colors, because I have the color mixing complement turned up very high. Right here I also duplicate that little cloud, and I've pasted it in two spots. One I made smaller, one I made bigger. I then set that layer to a very low setting on overlay, and it kind of creates this effect of like having clouds in the background, and I find it just makes it look very nice and realistic. And then I have to add the silver lining to my clouds, which I do with just a pure stark highlight set on the add setting, which is kind of like chroma dodging. And it just adds this really bright, bright, bright white that, in my opinion, the sun would be casting on these clouds since it's hitting them directly. This is kind of like a mid-morning picture that I was going for. I may end up adding a slight sky filter to it as I work on it a little bit more. Not 100% sure yet, but I will kind of see how it goes as I work. And then I did my sunshine. I like my sunshine nice and bright because I feel it makes it look much more cartoony and pretty. And then for the next little while of fiddle farting around here, I start adding highlights on various things for my sunshine. Again, all this is done using the add layer. I started by doing like these little rays of sunshine, but I wasn't happy with how they were looking. They just kind of looked eh. So I changed it a little bit and did more of like it's reflecting off of the particles in the sand, and it looked so much better when I did that. It looked the way I wanted it to, which was awesome. I did the same thing to the water, adding that nice bright highlight, blending it out using the Gaussian blur, and then just adding a slight turn down filter to it. On the water here, I also played around with my particle brush a little bit and added some more of these little sparkles to the waves, because I just felt that it needed just a little bit more of like this glitter on top of the wave. There's something about me and the particle brush. I love the effect that it gives so much. It's perfect for doing that little sparkle and glisten that you see on the water sometimes. And then I did the same thing here with the bushes. The only difference between the bushes and the way that I did the highlights on everything else was they're more sporadic here. They kind of sit with the flow of the fact that this is foliage, so the light would be hitting it softer in some spots. I did turn it down significantly compared to everything else though, but I was happy with the way it looked in the end. And then lastly, I just went around and did a couple more of these really bright highlights on the edges of the trees that would be exposed to the sunshine. I find the add setting in Fire Alpaca is perfect for doing natural highlights because it creates a nice bright light that looks reflective. It just grabs the color so nicely. Once my little trees were all done here, then I started doing a little bit more of the pop highlight on the fronds themselves. The first time that I tried it, I wasn't quite happy with how it looked. It was a little too bright, I think, and I didn't like how kind of sporadic it was. So I started doing a more brighter highlight here on top of the trees using a very large airbrush, and I just gently put it on there, and it looked so much better. It's kind of crazy when you look at, 20 minutes ago in this video versus now. Speaking of 20 minutes, the next 15 minutes are me screwing around with different lighting layers, so I'm actually just going to skip that and go straight to where I finished and selected the way that I wanted the sunshine rays to look, because this was ridiculously long, so there's no point in you guys sitting here watching it all. There we go. So as soon as I finished doing all the lighting and I was happy with the way that the sunshine rays looked, the only thing left to do on your piece is to sign it. Because with all beautiful artwork, you have to brand it with your beautiful little signature to claim that this is your artwork so everybody else can see it. I have a very artistic looking signature, so it is quite different compared to the way that a lot of people do their signatures. One thing I would advise is that your artistic signature should be different from the one that you brand any official document with, because you do not want them to be entirely the same. And with that, make sure you save, and da-da-da-da, you've successfully completed your canvas painting. Awesome! Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you did attend my art class, thank you even more so for attending. These classes are completely free, and if you would like to attend one, you can click the link in the description to my Discord, where I will always post the alert, usually 2 to 3 hours before class begins. They are normally 10 a.m. to about noon or 2 p.m. Pacific Coastal Time on Saturdays. If there's ever a time where I can't host a class or I have to end it early for whatever reason, I will make an announcement in the Discord. That is the place to follow if you want to see information regarding that. There will be a link in the description for you if you'd be interested in joining and checking that out. Simply just send me a PM when you join Discord. Be like, hey, I'm here for art classes or whatever. I have a special rank that I can ping so I don't alert everybody to the fact that I'm doing stuff. So if that's something you want to, then by all means you are welcome to. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any suggestions for future paintings or backgrounds you'd like to see, as well as future class suggestions, by all means leave a comment below. I'll review them, and if I like any of them, I may teach a class on it, and I'll post a video when time enables me. Hopefully not making the oopsie-doo of last time where I misconverted the video file, but don't worry about that. That's my stupid. I promise it won't happen again. But enough of my rambling before I drag this video out any longer. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and a fantastic life.